You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and today continues our Cocktober programming. All month long, we're highlighting spooky, sexy romance reads, and today is one for the books, my first Mothman romance. But before we get into that, let's talk business. As always, you can catch up on past episodes of Boobies and Newbies on your favorite podcast app or on our website, boobiesandnewbies.com. You can find and follow Boobies and Newbies across social media at Boobies Podcast. If you're a fan of the show and you've got a few minutes to spare, I'd greatly appreciate a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, if you would like to show the podcast a little extra love and support, you might consider joining us on Patreon. We've got monthly patron-only events, early sneak peeks, bonus clips, so much more, and you gain instant access to all of it for as little as $1 per month. You will find links to all of the above in today's show notes, and now, please join me in welcoming a returning guest of the pod, my favorite dungeon master. It's James!
Hi, Kelly. So happy to be here.
I almost said hi, Kelly, back to you. And then I was like, clearly I haven't had enough caffeine today. Hi, James.
That's your name.
Hi, Kelly. Hi, Kelly. It's good to have you back. And I was thinking about it. I believe this is actually not only your second episode of Boobies and Newbies, but I'm wondering if our previous read that we did together was a Cocktober book as well.
It was indeed. Yeah, you bring me in for spooky season because last time we did Hex, Love, and Rock and Roll, which was also very witchy and, seasonally appropriate.
Yeah. I definitely, I don't know if I should pretend that I planned it that way or if I should just admit that, it just kind of worked out that way. But obviously, Dungeon Master, you are the one who introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons, so I kind of think that you're a good person to go to when it comes to, like, fun, spooky, fantasy, paranormal things.
I am happy to be a fixture of Cocktober specifically, and about a year ago this time was when we started our Witches, Dungeons and Dragons campaign, which, for anyone interested, was about my fiance and Kelly and some of our friends were all witches during the Salem Salem witch trial-esque kind of puritanical society, and someone was up to no good, and the ladies had to figure out who that might be and why it's getting blamed on the witches. Yeah, it was great.
It was so fun. I had such a blast. I love anything witchy in general, which hence explains my previous pick for us to read together, Hex, Love, and Rock and Roll, which was definitely a different take on witch romance, I feel like, from the other witch romances I've read lately.
Well, I would say that, that was my absolute first introduction to romance novels, and I've been saving myself for you, Kelly. So this Sweet Berries that we just read is my second. I didn't want, I still want to be firmly in the newbie category for the Boobies and Newbies podcast. But I will say Hex, Love, and Rock and Roll was interesting, but I felt like it didn't have enough sex. And this book starts off with Too Horny to Think. And when I read that, I was like, yes, Kelly, thank you. This is the tone I was looking for in a romance novel. So great work, as always.
Oh, thank you. Well, and you're not exaggerating. It literally begins with Too Horny to Think. Like,
those are the opening lines. And
Chapter
when I
1.
read that, I was like, there you go, Kelly. That's what I wanted. No ambiguity about why we are here.
Yeah, I wish more books honestly started that way. Like, I feel like
started Too Horny to Think.
Yeah, just like I feel like it would just get a lot out of the way if it was just like, damn. Yeah.
Well, I wonder too, you think of the state of mind of someone who's trying to get into a romance novel, and if they're in that same headspace, I think this is like, good. This is what I'm looking for. I don't need a few chapters of build up. I'm ready to go right now. So this book doesn't disappoint in that regard. It throws you right into some steamy times.
Yeah, I think this one's definitely set expectations where I'm like, well, shoot, I'm going to have to find the perfect read for our next annual Cocktober read in 2023.
There you go.
But I've got a year
Well,
to
I'm
get
sure
there.
you do, and I'm sure you'll pick something fantastic.
Okay, well, I appreciate your faith in me, so I'll count on that. And I'll tell everybody that today, the book that begins with "Too Horny to Think" that we are talking about is "Sweet Berries" by C.M. Nascosta, and this paranormal fantasy romance was published in June this year, 2022. It's available on Amazon for free with Kindle Unlimited, and it is also the second book in C.M. Nascosta's Cambric Creek series. I'm not sure how to say it, but if this series might be familiar to a lot of romance readers who are both newbies to romance as well as longtime romance readers, maybe not Sweet Berries in particular. However, the first book in this series kind of took the romance reading community by storm last year, and that is Morning Glory Milking Farm, which have you heard anything about this? Did we talk about this?
I think you briefly mentioned it to me, but I don't know much.
It's funny because if you read this book and you start with Sweet Berries, which you definitely can, I think you can read them each as standalones, you wouldn't necessarily know what went on in Morning Glory Milking Farm, with the exception of there being some minor talk when our main character, Grace, is talking to this minotaur that like hits on her at work. He talks about how he's like,
Brogan.
Yeah, bro. Did you like that?
I did. Well, and what was particularly interesting is I do feel like there was a little bit of yeah, you needed some backstory, although you catch on pretty quickly, because she's walking around the farm, and then like Brogan gives her a bovine like lascivious smile, and I'm like, is this a literal cow? Like what? And then it's like she said, "Oh, my last boyfriend was also a minotaur." It's like, oh, okay, I'm on board. But there was a little like going in pretty blind, not knowing what the first one was about. It did take me a moment to realize, like, oh, okay, she's flirting with a minotaur who's very forward.
Yes, and when she isn't into hooking up with him, he's like, great, I will just head over to the farm. I will head over to the milking farm. And basically, I like to say that Morning Glory Milking Farm, and I talked about this a little bit in the Tit Talk that we did last month about monster romance and why people are so obsessed with monster romance. It was kind of the first monster romance for a lot of people. Like, I think the way that 50 Shades of Grey, kind of brought in a lot of romance readers, especially romance readers, into something a little more kinky or, dark romance related to BDSM. Not that 50 Shades of Grey is the best example of any of those,
Sure.
but just the way that it ushered in new readers, I think that's what Morning Glory Milking Farm did for people to read monster romance, which in the last year has just blossomed. And especially on TikTok, you see tons of people talking about monster romance. So it felt only appropriate that we include some kind of monster romance pick in our Cocktober lineup. And Sweet Berries, I think, was a fun choice, especially because I hadn't read a Mothman romance before. I'm a newbie to Mothmen. But I think you're right.
I just thought the whole Cambric Creek kind of vibe or feeling was like really interesting, but also kind of lighthearted. Like this coworker of her, Brogan, is like really explicitly inviting her to go have sex behind the barn. And perhaps it's in how she responds, but it doesn't feel creepy. It just feels like, oh, those minotaurs, they're so horny, like they're always down to have sex. And but it didn't feel like she was uncomfortable, so it was like, I don't know, felt nice and
cozy.
Yeah, so just like, if you want me, I'm here, but no pressure, and I'm not going to be weird about it because I'm just a minotaur.
Yeah, when I
I don't
read
know.
Morning Glory Milking Farm, and, I got echoes of that in this book. I think that book did a really good job of exploring the community a little bit more in Cambric Creek, because you get to see the farm. They frequent a coffee shop. They go to a
Hmm.
vampire-owned restaurant. There's just, you get to see, I think, a little bit more of the community in Morning Glory Milking
Yeah.
Farm than you do in this one. However, I think you still get the general sense that, like, this is a kind of idyllic, cozy community. Like, is it weird to say I get major, like, Murder, She Wrote, Cabot Cove vibes, but, like, without the murder?
Uh-huh. Without the weird undertone, at least that we know of yet.
Yeah, like, no murder, but more minotaurs. And,
Uh-huh.
like, of mothman. And everybody's, like, so welcoming and also kind to each other.
Well,
Like,
it's not a huge feature of the book, but there's a lot of, or there's like a few little discussions of like, oh, this is an area of the world where like humans are not like super dominant and in charge. And it doesn't really say
yeah.
like what the world is like, but it's like this is a place where everyone's welcome, and like
Hmm.
people with absurd external genitals are encouraged to wear pants, but if not, like, people go nude and that's fine. It's like there was some really interesting little world building, which, as like someone who loves building a universe and trying to tell a story, I'm like, oh, tell me more about the like interspecies politics. And
Right.
I don't know, I just found it very fascinating, but really lighthearted, like this kind of seamless integration of like, yeah, there's just people around. And you say like being new to Mothman romances, like this guy is kind of the only Mothman we meet. So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
are certain races or species more rare, or like mysterious? They
Yeah.
don't come out very often.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And I think that was, and I'll talk about this more. I'll give a synopsis before we dive farther in, but I will talk about this more. I think it's interesting. This one felt a little more insular to me than Morning Glory Milking Farm. And I know you don't have like the comparison between the two, but I think because Morning Glory Milking Farm was the first book in the series, you got to see more of the world. You got to experience maybe more characters and more species. And this one, there's a lot of focus on the two of them together, on Grace and
Hmm.
Merrick the Mothman. So I don't know if we got to see necessarily as much of the world around them, but we do get to see some. And yeah, I definitely want to go into that further. But let me give everyone the brief synopsis. And for once, this is actually a brief synopsis for this book. I know I say that so often that I'm going to start with the brief synopsis and then I lie to you and read the 4+ paragraph synopsis. But no, this is a quick one. So here we go. Grace has a job she loves, a community she adores, and plenty of friends. But her lack of bedroom action has left this event planner too horny to think. See, there you go. It's in the
Yep.
synopsis, too. When one ill advised night at the bar leads to her giving an exhibitionistic show to an unknown presence outside her bedroom window, she thinks she's hit a new low. When her voyeur turns out to be a nebbishly charming Mothman, Grace needs to decide if she can trust her body and her heart with this garnet-eyed stranger before he flies out of her life for good. I think that was like the perfect amount of cheesy puns for a
Uh-huh.
synopsis.
Uh-huh.
Like any more and it would have been too much, but I'll take it. I'll take a couple of them.
I think it sets the tone well. I felt like this book had a very kind of like lighthearted, yeah, it's funny, it's a little cheeky at times, and doesn't seem to take itself too seriously.
Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned when it comes to the world building, the mention of there being the freedom of dress. They call it
Uh-huh.
that the mayor had been elected largely on a freedom of dress platform,
Yeah.
where
Uh-huh.
if your genitals are external, you wear clothing, and if they're on the any category, you don't have to. And so, a couple other things I highlighted that I thought were a fun addition to kind of, I guess what's interesting to me is it sort of bridges like reality with fantasy. Like there's a lot of elements we see where we're like, oh, I know we don't have that exact same thing, but it's weird to think of it as a fantasy because it's so similar. Like they have a dating app called Growler. And I loved that because again, I like fantasy and paranormal that make some kind of like commentary or connection with the contemporary world. And so to include a dating app, I thought was fantastic.
Well, and it's funny too, I would say outside of romance novels, my main category would be like fantasy and stuff like that. So this was hard to place like technologically because there's minotaurs and satyrs and dryads running around, but they also still clearly have like pickup trucks and cell phones and but yeah, it is an interesting like contemporary yet rural or it's like very farm centric. I guess there's a university in town, but I had a hard time like placing like an era. It's like, all right, I guess it's just like the common era, but seamless integration of many different races.
Yeah, because I mean, they have technology, like you said. They recognize certain things like the possibility of getting like a UTI. They have, she has vibrators.
The Mothman is trying to promote like sustainable agriculture and like not using pesticides because it's bad for bees. So it's like, it feels very modern, but there's also monsters.
Right, exactly. Well, and I don't know, I think they mentioned it briefly in this one. I mean, I know that they talk about the university where Merrick is working at, but they definitely do in the first book. They mentioned that they're close to a city. I think one of them even says that like they lived in the city or they live in the city.
Yeah.
And so it's clearly like a farming community that's like in the suburbs of some city, but like you don't really know what like what city or like are we in America? Are we in our world? Like what, what's the deal? But I don't know. I love that it's like regardless of how far removed the place is, there's still so many connections to what we know in our everyday lives.
Yes. And I think the ambiguity works in your favor. You can kind of pick your own adventure about where and when and how this is.
You know what? There was one species that I wasn't familiar with, and I read on my Kindle. And so when I highlighted the term, you get like kind of a dictionary definition or some kind of reference. And the reference was to Dungeons and Dragons. So I was going to ask you about this one.
Which one is it?
Tiefling?
Oh, tiefling. Yeah, those are like kind of demonic, or they come from like an infernal plane, so they usually have like horns and some fire resistance.
Okay, then.
Yeah, they're a playable race. You can be a tiefling if you want, and you usually like speak infernal, and you might have some connection to demonic forces, but you're not necessarily evil. You could be if you wanted to, obviously.
Nice. Yeah, it definitely makes me wonder how much D&D this author is playing, that's for sure. Because we get all sorts of different species that I'm, definitely less familiar with. But I think there's a lot of ones people will know too, like werewolves, obviously. Even if you don't know, I mean, how much do people really know Mothmen? But I'm like, even if you don't know Mothmen, they even make some jokes about some of the myth and lore surrounding Mothmen, which I do think is pretty cute, like about what he eats, and also him like hiding under a bridge to like snatch people.
I think it's interesting too that there's not a more official name for Mothmen. It's like they need some actual name like Dryad or Satyr or something. It's like they're not just this hybrid of moth and men. They're their own thing, clearly.
Yeah, it's true.
I thought another interesting facet of the having monsters in this like that we may not be as familiar with their physiology is like, in one of these opening scenes where she's masturbating, she reaches for her goblin cock vibrator. And I
Yes.
thought but she doesn't go into really much detail about it, and she's envisioning who her voyeur outside is, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a lizard man with two cocks and he's stroking them, out of sync, or
Yep.
maybe it's a bat who's hanging upside down while masturbating. Isn't that going to make a mess while he hangs upside down? And I thought it was interesting just because, like, and especially from D&D, goblins are these like tiny little creatures. So I was like, goblin cock, like that doesn't sound particularly satisfying, but I think it leaves room for interpretation or imagination if there's some feature of what you think a goblin cock would be that you'd like to latch on to that does something for you. So it's kind of nice that maybe we're not as familiar because it leaves more to the imagination.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and just to say, there are sex toys out there these days that are definitely bringing in the monster verse into the bedroom, which I mean, I've seen some of them, and God, they're gorgeous. Like and the tentacles and the, like different shapes, and we'll get into shapes too when we talk about Merrick's dick too, because that's
right.
You know what? I'm a very visual person, and it was taking a lot for me to envision his penis. Like, it really was.
I found myself, I think one of the more exciting elements of reading a monster romance, and maybe this is why they've gained popularity. I was excited to hear what this guy's dick looked like. Let me tell you. I was like, get it out. Let's figure out what's going on. In a way that I don't think I would ever have like, yeah, pull his cock out. I know what that's going to be like. I was like, what's going on here? This could be all sorts of stuff. So I felt excited, like it was my first time all over again to know what's it going to be like when we pull this thing out.
Well, and it's like, not only is it like, pulling it out of your pants kind of thing, his is like hidden. His is hidden inside his like little secret
slit
pouch thing that you don't see at all. So you're just like, not only does this guy get to walk around without any clothes on, but there's nothing like hanging out. There's no way for you to make any sort of guesses about what to expect. And I kind of liked that from Grace's point of view too, because she even says, she's like, I've been with my ex was a minotaur, but like, I don't really know anything about Mothman anatomy. And even not knowing, she still is like, look, I don't really care. Like, I'm super into this guy, and whatever it is, like, we'll make it work. Like, we'll figure it out, and it'll be fine. And I thought that was like, there were so many, I feel like, covert messages like that in this book, where it just screamed acceptance and like learning how to please your partner. Like, even if like when they have sex, a lot of the times it's just him going down on her with his like supersonic tongue, because he doesn't, it's like almost work for him to like get it out all the time. And then also when they do have like penetrative sex, he goes for like hours, and he's like, I don't want to hurt you. So they find what works for them, which I feel like is so real for couples in real life.
Totally. Well, yeah, and I felt particularly that it was like, I guess his species has like a month-long refractory period. Yeah. So he's like not that interested in sex most of the time, but totally down to go down on her. Especially that there's this funny, like, oh, you're so sweet. Like, as a Mothman, I'm drawn to like strong, strong berry smells, and you remind me of sweet berries. Yeah, exactly. That he's like, interested in tasting her and totally down with that. But it did seem like a interestingly particular fantasy of like, most of the time I want oral, and then like maybe once a month I get a good hard fucking for like a couple hours.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting, because I feel like, a lot of the time when we, obviously there's an element of fantasy when we read romance. Like, there's definitely things that you want to emulate and replicate, like for your own relationships. But at the same time, there is a fantasy element, and a lot of the times that includes a 6'4" buff blonde man with like green eyes, and he can go for hours, and he has this perfect penis, and it's just like, I liked this because they found what worked for them, and he was still very interested in her pleasure and making sure that she was enjoying herself, and clearly she had the higher sex drive between the two of them. And I don't think you see that a lot in romance and beyond. Like, I don't think we have a lot of conversations about women being the ones with the higher sex drive, because it's just never been a conversation topic in our society when we focus on like men being sexual creatures as opposed to women wanting sex.
Well, and the contrast of like, the Minotaur was kind of the stand-in for the hypersexual, like always hitting on you, testosterone-y male, and then you've got this Mothman who's like, clearly he's very tall and strong, and he has some traditionally masculine features. I love his like fuzzy mantle as a bearded person. I thought that was an interesting kind of like, oh, he's got some interesting hair / feather stuff going on. But yeah, that he's not so, pressury for sex or anything like that he's not always ready to go, I thought was good. Also, something you mentioned just about like maybe some elements of this being fantasy and being a little unrealistic, but that's totally fine in a fantasy novel. I thought something that really showed that side of this to me in this novel was the kind of voyeurism aspect where she's masturbating and she maybe hears something outside her window. And I thought it was entertaining, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, in reality, I'm pretty sure someone outside your window gets you out of the mood pretty quick.
Right. It feels like, very predatory.
Yeah, and not so like, well, better give them a show. But that's one of the beauties of a romance novel, is that you can explore what that experience would be like or feel like, and it's not scary. it's allowed to be an exhibitionist experience or a voyeuristic experience. I kind of felt, even with this discussion of someone outside the window, it's like, as a man reading this, like being really into her masturbating, I kind of got to feel that like, oh, maybe I'm outside the window, like looking in at this very hot scene. So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting thing to get to explore in the safety of a romance novel.
And what's interesting, and I did notice this in Morning Glory Milking Farm as well, I think if I'm remembering it correctly, it's told from a single POV. It's told from her POV throughout. So there are definitely like benefits of that, and there are drawbacks depending on how, you look at it and what you prefer to read. Like, personally, I usually like to read a dual POV because I want to know what everybody's feeling and thinking, because we all know that we don't necessarily communicate these things properly or do exactly what we want to do. And so, but I think what's interesting is that because it's told entirely from her point of view, there's never really the opportunity like for it to feel predatory, that like he's watching her outside, because it's all from her point of view and her thinking, oh, I love this, I'm getting off on this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care who it is, I'm going to imagine who it is. So it never felt icky to me.
No. And I think that was very important.
Yeah. The less icky, the better.
Yeah. Icky and sexy don't usually go. I mean, debatable, but
yeah, to each their own. We're not here to shame.
Yeah, well, certainly, yeah, as a guy reading it and hearing that she's being like spied on, it was reassuring to hear her internal monologue of like, oh gosh, I'm just so into this right now.
Yeah.
If they climb in through the window, I might just go with it and like, let's give them a show, moaning louder than I might usually if I knew I was alone. So definitely one of those things that's like, didn't seem realistic in terms of like, if I hear something in my window, I'm stopping and I'm checking it out. But nice to just get to dive into what that experience would be like.
And while he doesn't join her technically,
yeah,
we got to talk about the tongue thing.
We sure do. So you have this great image of like a moth's coiled proboscis just like kind of sneaking its way into in through the crack in her window.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because like I saw you a while ago in person and we talked about this briefly, but just like how long is this
Yeah.
guy's tongue?
Well, and it's funny too because you think of a moth's face and it's not a very humanoid face. Like you can look at the cover and it's this very like humanoid Mothman. He's got the fuzzy mantle, but it's like I'm more curious about the anatomy of his tongue than his cock, really. Like I'm like,
Right.
how does it? Where do you put it? Like how far down does it go? How far out can you know? And it sounds like he can like suck with the tip of his tongue, like
Yeah.
retrieving nectar. There wasn't a lot of clarity on the anatomy. It leaves a lot up to the imagination, but I did. So I thought like the first masturbation scene where there's clearly someone there and she's just putting on a show felt like believable, that like, okay, maybe you think someone's at the window but you're too horny to check. But yeah, when she like feels sucking on her clit and is just like, I'm just gonna go with it, that was the part where I was like, I don't know.
I mean, at one point she says he has a Dyson strength tongue. Like
Yeah.
she compares his tongue to a vacuum, like multiple points. So, and not only is it long, but it's like he can like suck. And I mean, there's another scene, and I think this is actually in part of my sexcerpt that I've highlighted, but in that scene, he's going down on her, and it's like he can like curl his tongue inside her around to her G-spot, and I'm just like, oh my God, like this guy doesn't even need a dick, like with everything that he does with his tongue. Like it's what else do you need?
Sounds pretty perfect.
Yeah, that was, and keep in mind, her masturbating is one of the first scenes that we see, you know, for anybody who hasn't read it yet. Like she's too horny to think. Like, I mean, we are starting off with a bang, and it just keeps on going from there.
She's been out at the bars with friends and Brogan, who's been teasing her all night, and she knows she's going to make a mistake, so she goes home and handles business on her own.
Yep.
Or what she thinks is on her own.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I will say, I did think it's so funny. In a lot of ways, their courtship was very similar to, I feel like, dating today, where, you know, I mean, they don't even, he uses his tongue to assist her with masturbating before they ever meet in person, or she knows his name. But when they meet, it's very awkward. He's very introverted and quiet. He, you know, doesn't really know how to act around her, and not just because of the tongue masturbation thing, just because he's kind of like this nerdy Mothman scientist.
It's pretty funny too that you know, he sneaks his tongue in the window before we meet him.
Right.
Looking back on it, it's a little bit like, this guy really was like, I'm gonna go for it.
I'm getting
shoot my
tongue
shot. In there. But I'm not gonna announce myself. I'm just gonna I'm gonna go straight for her clit and see if that's like a nice enough way to say hello.
Hiya. But yeah.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
I help you out there.
And then she only knows that it's him when he makes his little like clicking noises. Chirping. She's like, oh my God, that must be you, the man who put his tongue in my pussy. Like, it's just so
I'd recognize
funny.
those cheerful chirps anywhere.
But I mean, from there, it's like they kind of have this like casual dating thing going on, with her also being reluctant to get into a relationship with anybody. Like she kind of just wants to hook up and keep things casual, and then also knowing that he might leave for his work at any time. It's kind of this, you know, general understanding of like, well, let's just see how things are going. And, you know, 1 month passes, 2 months pass. I think it's summer. I think he's there for summer. Right. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, and they kind of just sort of fall into this relationship where of course, by the end, they're in love with each other and she wants him to stay and he's gonna stay anyway. And
Uh-huh.
it's, but I liked that it was very reminiscent of what I think a lot of dating today looks like. So again, just one more
Hmm.
example of reality kind of climbing into this fantasy world.
Yeah. No, it did have a good. It almost feels like the whole atmosphere of Cambric Creek is a bit more casual. Like it seems like minotaurs are offering casual sex on a pretty regular basis. Maybe dating isn't. It's like you find out not only is it a personality thing, but it might even be like an anatomy compatibility. Like we're just going to figure out if this is a thing that works for both of us,
Yeah.
or maybe not. But let's keep it light. Let's have some fun.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I know you haven't read Morning Glory Milking Farm, but one of the main things in that book is the woman who falls in love with a minotaur. They basically do so while it depends if you look at it as sex work or not. I look at it as
Hmm.
sex work, but he comes in to get milked and he basically
Uh-huh.
falls for the woman milking him and they start a relationship. And so I mean, there's just a lot of things that maybe we kind of don't treat as lightly or as positively in
Right.
our society that you see in this society as being normalized. And
Hmm.
I it just makes it so much cozier and sweeter.
Yeah. Which is really, really refreshing. Like it felt like this. There's kind of this hope or vision of like a sex positive world where you can more openly hit on people, and because there's no subtext of anything creepy or weird, like people are allowed to say yes or no and you shoot your shot, and
Mhm.
if they say no, you move on and it's all copacetic. I felt like this kind of had that vibe of like
Yeah.
we're all pretty body positive. Some people are walking around naked because their genitals aren't so in your face, but for the most part, we're just letting people live their lives. And yeah, it had a good vibe. It reminded me a little bit of how maybe Schitt's Creek is with David's
Yes.
character of like he's gay, and it's no one in the town has a problem with that. It's just like a normal fact of life, and it's really positive and lovely to not even have to really or even his partner confronting it with his parents. It's like
Right. Right. It doesn't
so
have to be
so
trauma.
right.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and although I will say they talk about how they're going to elect a new mayor and freedom of dress is not on their platform.
Yeah. Well, so I thought that this book was a really interesting contrast to Hex, Love, and Rock and Roll because I felt that that book was really heavily focused on plot and there was not as much of an emphasis on sex. And I felt a little bit
This
like
is
this
the
book
opposite.
was the inverse, a huge
Yeah.
emphasis on sex. And I was also trying to latch onto like, okay, what are going to be like the main plot elements here? Like, oh, there's a new mayor and she's in charge of or there's like someone who's like gonna be the new mayor and
Hmm.
she's in charge of like running the wedding for someone in that person's family, or maybe I forget exactly the details there, but it's like, oh, maybe like the wedding will get messed up and she'll be to blame and that will jeopardize the mayorship, or so that'll be a point of contention, and it's just not at all. It's like
Yeah.
the wedding goes off without a hitch and the guy's probably still going to get elected, and that's all there is to it.
And I will say I haven't read the third book in the series yet. But
Hmm.
I do know that the one of the main characters is a werewolf. So I'm wondering if it's somebody related to that prominent werewolf family that is in Cambric Creek. But
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
Well, the teaser was pretty interesting because it was something about like, yeah, being able to breed with a werewolf like while they're in werewolf form
Yes.
being significant in some way. So yeah, it does seem like maybe they're building towards like the true socialites of the society, which are you know, the slightly more polished werewolves because they wear clothes all the time, and the dress code is less flexible. I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
I don't
yeah,
know. Because I've read both of these books at this point, and they were very low on the plot. Like, I mean, it's, and you know what? That's not even a complaint from me. Like, I think sometimes that's what you need to read, is just something that there isn't a lot of tension. There isn't a lot of angst. There isn't even really much of a plot. I mean, really, it's not even a fight of like, oh no, they have to break up because he's gonna leave. Like, no, they just they start dating and fucking, and then they just continue to do so. And then, you know, at the point where it's like you think it might become a problem, they're like, I love you, please don't leave. And he doesn't. So I mean, they're just
not gonna
there just never really is any kind of issue, and there isn't really any kind of issue with her job and his job. So I mean, it's very low on plot, it's very low on angst. If you're just looking for like some fun and a little bit of, you know, fantasy magicalness, like, this is a fun one for that, I think.
It sure is. Yeah, it was really funny because there were like maybe 3 or 4 points in the book that like could have been points of tension,
Right.
like because he's coming to the farm to tell them like they need to do a pollinator garden and they need to be using like better pesticides or whatever, and you're like, oh man, is he gonna like, you know, like report their farm, and then there's going to be tension between his like love of the environment and his love of her and her job that she cares about. No, like she's running the wedding for one of the prominent families. Is that going to cause conflict? No, like
I kept thinking he was gonna see the Brogan like hitting on her and like get like insecure in their relationship. No, you know, I mean,
no.
So it's just none of that holds any weight whatsoever on their relationship or the story as a whole. But that's okay.
Well, and even like what you might consider the main conflict is that he might move on for his research, and there's that like friend of his from South America who raises hummingbirds who shows up, and she's like, oh no, this is it, he's leaving. And I thought it was a little weird, or like I don't know if I really bought it, that he's like, no, I told you I was staying like a month ago. And she was like, oh, I was so like lost in your eyes that I didn't hear you. Like I get being wrapped up, or like, but if you love someone, I think your brain would turn on for the moment where you're like, wait, you're staying? Oh,
he's
awesome.
Just got like such good tongue game that she
maybe he
was
told
distracted.
her at like a really inopportune time. Yeah. By the way, I'm staying. What?
I mean, you like, honestly, if people haven't read this, like, we're not exaggerating. Like the amount of tongue action in this book is just outrageous. But with that being said, I think it's time that we share a couple of our favorite sexcerpts, if you've got one.
All right. I sure do. I would say personally, I thought the 2 intro masturbating scenes were really hot, at least as a guy, like getting to sort of experience this exhibition / voyeurism. So let me see what I've got here.
While you're doing that, I'll just give a shout out to the scene that I didn't pick, and there are plenty of them to choose from, but I did want to point out that not only does she, you know, masturbate with her like goblin dicks, but she also uses a vibrator on him, which I thought was really hot. And that comes like later in the book. It's a shorter scene, but I thought that was great. I'm always about incorporating toys into sex scenes, so I loved that. I didn't pick that as my sexcerpt, but I did love that.
Well, and not just using toys with women, but using toys for everyone's
exactly. Fun. And Mothman too.
That's right. So yeah, I picked a pretty early one, but she's referencing the fact that there's someone at her window, and she goes, maybe it's someone cute. She considered as her fingers sought to soothe her aching clit. She moaned at the first touch, pleasure rippling up her back, louder and more wantonly than she might have done without an audience. Her fingers circled the sensitive bud, tapping and squeezing until she cried out again, settling into a rhythm that left her hips rocking. Steady circles, medium pressure, and thoughts of her watcher. It was bliss.
Bliss. I love that.
Bliss.
That's a good one.
Yeah, just like a really positive relationship with the fact that someone might be spying on you. Like,
it's nice. It's fun. I feel like, and it's interesting. I know that this is a Cocktober episode, but I actually just recorded one of our episodes for November that focuses much more on the kink side of things. And so I like that. I like that we're exploring some different interests of people that, you know, goes beyond, I never liked the term vanilla, that goes beyond the typical bedroom activities, I suppose.
You know what I think is so, this is a bit of a tangent, but what is so funny about vanilla is, like, vanilla is absolutely an exotic spice from Madagascar. There is nothing
Yes.
vanilla about vanilla. So I think
There you go.
vanilla sex can just mean really good, exotic, fun sex that you might not get everywhere else. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I always think of it as classic, that it's like, you know, doesn't go out of style. You can zhuzh it up however much you want. Go. Like when I go to get frozen yogurt, I usually always get vanilla because you get to add in gummy bears and chocolate chips and everything else that you want. A nice mishmash of goodies.
Vanilla with a few toys all of a sudden is the best.
There you go. Okay, cool. Well, I definitely needed to like highlight his tongue in this book. So,
yeah, please.
I've got a scene. Let's see. This is from chapter 6. I don't really know what that means in terms of the book, but anyway, I'll start from here. When his tongue dipped into her, Merrick's moan reverberated through her core, shaking through her body. The endless length was a slithering, probing, cock-like intrusion that had her fisting the bedding as he pressed into her walls, finding the spot inside her that made her see stars. She had never had her G-spot licked before. Well, of course not. She had never had her G-spot licked before, but now that she had, nothing else would ever suffice again. There was no toy, no vibrator or dildo that could ever match the sensation of his long, unspooled tongue laving over the spot like a serpent, making her legs kick and thrash as if she were having some sort of fit. Oh, Merrick.
I'm still just trying to wrap my head around this tongue that both itself can suck but also licks. Like, I'm imagining like an elephant trunk, but then is it flat as well?
Yeah.
It's perplexing. It really leaves a lot to the imagination.
And see, and I know that this is probably so wrong. Like, the way that I picture it in my head is that in his mouth, he's got like, not a fruit roll up, but like, do you remember like those Sour Belt things where it's like you would buy them and they were like all rolled up and you would like unroll it and
or like the gum tape?
Yes. Like that's what I'm picturing is like it's all rolled up and then like you just kind of like unroll it inch by inch. Like, so I don't, and I'm sure that's wrong. I'm sure that's not what anybody else is picturing, but that's what I see in my head.
But again, I think this is the power of a monster romance is there is no right or wrong, you know. It's like people debating how a mythical creature should be. It's like, hello, there's no rule book about this. It's all made up. It's all make believe.
He should have wings and a fruit roll up tongue. That's what, okay?
And if that's what does it for you, then lean into that. Like, you know, but yeah, it's just funny. It's like, does it impede how he talks? Clearly not. Like, what else does he do with his tongue? When he sips his coffee in the morning, does he just leave it on the desk and his tongue does all the sipping? Like, tell me more about this anatomy. I'm fascinated.
Well, and I know neither of our scenes kind of expanded on this, but I know that we were both super curious about his dick. And it's the way it's described is like an S shape, but it's like it's thin at the tip, and then at one point it just gets much larger. And I don't know. I was having a rough time picturing this one.
I was too, and yeah, I landed on like vaguely toy toy-like in appearance, like, but yeah, really bizarre, and that it's like it's coming out of this slit, and at first she's like, "Oh, this is, how cute, we can work with this," and then like, "Oh my," like it keeps going. Was like, yeah, I found myself being really invested in figuring out like what this guy's dick looked like, which I think was a fun aspect of this in a way that I wouldn't like. Okay, it's a guy, I know what those dicks look like.
Yeah.
This was like, yeah, what is going on? Like, you've mentioned that he doesn't wear pants, so we know he doesn't have external genitalia, but what are we dealing with
And
here?
like, where does it go when it's inside? Like, is it
Right.
like the tongue? Is it coiled up, or is it just like long against his leg-ish? I don't know. Like, I have so many follow-up questions.
Well, and that he's kind of got like slits and folds for her to play with as well was an
Yeah.
interesting like foreplay that yeah.
Yeah, and she was into it.
Different.
She was like, I'm just gonna touch this thing that's right here. Like this, it's a little bit wet. That seems like a good sign. Like, let's go with that.
Right, yeah. Generally that's like what you go for, the wet spots.
But yeah, no, I definitely would be interested to read, I think, another Mothman romance, and I know that they're out there too, because
Is that right? Because I was curious. Just this is such an unconventional creature, so it's like, yeah, I know about tieflings and satyrs and dryads and stuff, but I haven't heard of Mothmen outside of more this kind of like, Jeff Goldblum's The Fly or something. Like, there's not a lot of like insect mammal hybrid
I would say
stuff going on.
In the last year, we've seen more Mothmen, and gargoyles has been the other one that I've seen more of. And it's just because like I feel like we all have like a basic understanding of like werewolves and vampires. Like they're just so much in like the cultural lexicon that it's like you have this picture of like what they look like. And I think the reason we've seen those for so long is they're also like the much more humanoid type monsters. Like you can wrap your brain around somebody falling in love with somebody who more or less looks like a human. They just happen to have like a lot more hair or turn into a wolf. But now that we're kind of branching out and starting to see more like humans with monsters and in monster form, I want to know more about like each of them. So I would be curious to see like in another Mothman romance if it's the same thing. Like, are there,
right?
Is everything like hidden? Like, what I want to know, like,
is there consensus in the community about Mothman
genitalia
and the extent of this tongue?
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is just widely known amongst Mothman romance readers, and I don't know.
It's interesting too because I felt like I'm having a hard time. This is a weird thing to say. I'm having a hard time thinking of a sexier insect than a moth. Just because there's a lot of insect things. It's like, spider person? Not sure. Maybe if you're into rope bondage, but beyond that, like pretty creepy,
We do have a spider romance, by the way, just so you know.
Okay, well, yeah, I stand corrected. Maybe
I just know of the one series about them, though. So continue your list.
Well, I felt like there were a lot of endearing things about him being a moth, like the kind of chirps and clicks seemed like a very cute kind of like a moaning, but a new thing. How she describes that every time she leaves him, she has his like velvety gray powder all over her that he uses for flying. Yeah, there's the fuzzy mantle, which is like a little reminiscent of like some chest hair or a beard or something like that. So I thought a moth was a really good choice as like this kind of mysterious, alluring creature of the night with some clearly very like traditionally masculine characteristics, but also some things that are a little softer or a little more delicate that gives him this, and the fact that he can fly, which I think is really funny, that she like is just terrified of flying around with him. Like she just like clings to him till it's over, and there's not this like I can show you the world moment where she sees Cambric Creek
She's
from
like,
above
fuck
and
that.
is like, Wow. Yeah, she's like, let me know when it's over. I'm gonna bury my head in your mantle and like not. No thanks.
Yeah, yeah. What about, I'm trying to think of another like insect creature, but
I mean, so like butterflies are similar and they feel a
Mhm.
little flashier, so I could even see like maybe like a romance conflict where this very like flamboyant butterfly boy comes to town who's like just gorgeous and shimmery and also has a good tongue and
Yeah, check
but
me out.
uh-huh. Yeah, it's all about, peacocking a little bit.
How about a
Um
grasshopper?
Yeah, I don't know. They seem spiny. They seem sharp. There's so many insects that it's like, oh, Ant-Man, like, all for Paul Rudd, but beyond that, no thanks.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you had me at Paul Rudd, but like that's it.
But I lost you at Ant Dick.
Yeah, no, none
Yeah.
of that. None of that. Well, and I'm curious, now that we're starting to see more monster romance, and like I said, I've read Gargoyle this year. I've read now Mothman.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of wondering like what's going to be next? Like what's going to be the next big one? And I know some people have already done mermaids and merman, but I'm kind of thinking
Mhm.
like maybe with the Little Mermaid revival, like maybe that'll be like the
Mhm.
next thing, but I don't know. Like what would you want to see next?
Well, I'm also certainly a sci-fi fan, so I think similar to Monster, kind of Alien introduces like this realm of ambiguity where we can have genitalia that are whatever we want them to
Yes.
be. So, that's interesting to me. Let's see. There are a ton of like really interesting monsters, specifically in Dungeons and Dragons, that I could see being satisfying to some people's kinks. A weird one
Mm.
that comes to mind is the gelatinous cube, which is this like basically jello monster that's like almost purely invisible. And what it'll do is it'll like hang out in the hallway of a dungeon. So as you're walking down, you just kind of like walk into the cube and they
Oh,
start dissolving you. It's like not so good, but I could see it being a little more like kind of bondagey, like you're stuck in this thing and it's jello
interesting.
is doing something good for you. Um, I thought there was a scene where she's in the coffee shop with her satyr friend
Mhm.
who's like an insatiable gossip and like also ultra horny. So I thought something like, I appreciate kind of the like cheeky, sexy aura around satyrs. So I could see that being I feel like satyrs are like hosting an orgy or something. That's kind of how I imagine
Yeah,
like
like I don't know if I would expect them to have like maybe they could have like a polyamorous relationship
uh-huh.
romance. Like cuz I would have a hard time buying a satyr like giving up the
Being
satyr
really sexy.
lifestyle. Like I
Oh, sure, settling down, yeah.
yeah, so I that would just be like an all fuck fest. Like I
Uh-huh.
don't know about, but yeah, I don't know if I've actually read a satyr romance. So prove me wrong. Somebody let me know, please.
I mean, in traditional mythology, satyrs are pretty rapey, which is maybe not so fun,
Oh, okay,
but,
got it. Less
they I
romanticizing for sure.
I think there's a lot of stories of, like, a satyr, like, sneaking up on a nymph and getting
Yes.
up to no good in,
Yes.
like, at least Greek mythology. So maybe they need a little revival in terms of, like, "No, no, no, that's all those stories are widely exaggerated, and we're very consensual
We're
folk."
rebranding the satyr.
That's right, that's right.
I love it. Well, until our satyr romance comes around, hopefully by Cocktober 2023, because, we have to come back for round 3 of the podcast together. But until
Absolutely.
then, let's go ahead and give this book a few grades. And
Yes, please.
I don't think the grading system has changed since you were on last, but I don't know. I change it enough where to the point
Why
where
don't you give us a review?
yeah, yeah. So we're going to go with heart, humor, and heat on a scale of
Okay.
1 to 10. 10 being the very best that it could be for you, of course. And so let's
Mhm.
start with heart. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of really positive heart aspects in this book. I would say the one shortcoming for heart for me maybe is maybe that there isn't conflict in their relationship that they
Sure.
overcome with love. So, I'm feeling like a good 7 to it. I think there's a lot of like that body positivity and like figuring out what kind of activities work well with their respective libidos.
Yeah.
I think they both show each other some really sweet moments. Like he's showing off his science and his passion about his hummingbirds, and she's able to share her sweet berries with him, and that that was a
Yeah,
kind of
she
cute scene.
is.
So, um, yeah, so I thought there were some good moments, but I didn't feel like they kind of fall slowly in love, and there isn't this like really heart-throbbingly like, gosh, this is my person, this is who I'm meant to be. It feels a little more like, wow, I really like this guy, and then it develops into something stronger as we expect. But I don't know that
Yeah.
it was like so heart-filled for me,
Yeah, there's
but
no
still good, still
like
good.
grand gestures. There's no,
Hmm.
it's definitely a quieter, more casual kind of love, which I don't have a problem with, and I'm glad that we do have books that are showing us that, because
Hmm.
it, shows that there isn't just one way to fall in love, and so,
Which it's funny because I would say I'm generally pretty like skeptical or eye rolly sometimes at the grand
oh,
gesture
me too.
thing, right? So it's like, but at the same time, you're kind of trained that
Yes,
that is what is really like, oh my gosh, this is such a big, they really love each other because he's going out of his way or he's
right.
made some big sacrifice or something. And so yeah, like you said, it's great to have an example of something that's probably more realistic to how a lot of relationships develop as like I was looking for a hookup or I was looking for some companionship and I found someone who checked the boxes, but then we just really found something that worked for us.
Yeah.
That said, it doesn't kind of have that
Yes.
punchy moment that really says this is high on the heart category. So,
And you're right, it feels like something's missing when you don't have some of those gestures that we're so used to seeing. Like, and so
mhm,
I'm with you. I would probably give it a 6.5, 7. I will say the other thing that always punches hard up for me a lot is when there's an element of family or found family or really close friendship ties, and I don't know if
mhm,
we really got much of that. Like, she obviously has like a few good friends, but even then, it didn't really feel like, these are the friends that'll do anything for you, that are, gonna take care of you because you don't have family nearby. And there wasn't really a lot of
right.
talk or interaction with family in general. So,
There There was some interesting stuff with, like, that he kind of had a preconceived notion about humans being really mean because he had,
yes,
like, worked with some humans that had been mean to him in the past, so but they didn't really play that up as, like, him finding family or
no.
yeah, it was maybe missing a little bit at least in terms of making that explicit.
Yeah, so I think that's just one thing that would have made it a little
Mhm.
more enjoyable for me, was like if there was a little bit more of the family there. But that's okay. And then over to humor, what do you think?
Yeah, I also thought that there were some humorous elements of this book. Um, I think, like, more than humor, I wanna say I would give it, like, a really high score in terms of lightheartedness, which is maybe not
Yeah.
exactly the same as humor, but, uh, generally, I just felt the overall vibe was really positive and friendly and nice, so, but humor itself, like I wrote down, she really likes this, Bad Decision Boulevard would welcome its newest residents to the dumb bitch court condominiums when she's, like, thinking about having sex with Brogan or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she brings that line up, like the Bad Decision Boulevard and whatever. She
Yeah,
uses
I
that a
liked
lot.
that.
And I thought too the moment where she's thinking about her intruder outside her window and thinking of it being a bat person masturbating upside down and like, isn't that going to make a huge mess when he comes? So yeah, there were some humorous elements like that, but I guess I'll give it an 8 primarily in the like I really liked kind of how lighthearted and not serious the tone of the book is, which isn't maybe the same thing as humor.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think lighthearted is the perfect way to describe it. Like, I also love when they go for like ice cream and she's like assuming that he's gonna get like aphid
Oh
ice
yeah, yeah,
cream.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and, there's all the comparisons to like, his vibrating dick and like his vacuum strength tongue and stuff. So there's
Uh-huh.
definitely some great lingo and like one-liners and stuff, especially from her. I don't know if he really adds a lot to the comedy, but
No.
that's okay. And then, she has her friend who I think has some great things to say as well. But in terms of humor, I would probably give it like maybe a 5 or a 6. Like I do think there were some comical moments. It's definitely not depressing or angsty in any way, but
Hmm.
yeah, definitely not high on the humor. Lightheartedness, though, I think is the perfect way to think about it.
Yeah, I would just say the overall tone, like you said, there's very little tense moments or angry moments. It's all very pretty friendly and copacetic, which
Copacetic romance. That's what I'm looking for.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that brings us to our final rating for Heat. What do you think?
I would definitely rate this pretty highly on Heat. I thought the 2 opening masturbation scenes were great. I was very invested in finding out what his cock was like, and yeah, the tongue work was really strong in this one. So yeah, I think I'll also give this an 8.
Yeah, I mean, especially when it's like your only comparison when it comes to romance is Hex, Love, and Rock and Roll, which, had a lot of hex. It didn't have a lot of sex, but this one definitely had more than that, that's for sure. But I think it was a good amount too, considering the book is only, a little over 200 pages, that there were
Hmm.
multiple scenes. I'm probably gonna give this. I might even give it a 9. Like, I mean, there's toy play. There's multiple scenes. We've got some voyeurism. Like, I'm invested in this one for sure.
Yeah, I thought this was, yeah, as you were saying, in contrast to Hex, Love, and Rock and Roll, this was really the Heat was the category this one was going to satisfy
Right.
over a plot line or over comedy. And yeah, yeah, like you said, and just that the monster aspect of it, like she gets to think about a lot of different types of dicks, which is was a fun. It's like lizard people. Oh, I guess lizard people have 2 dicks,
Yeah.
and minotaurs, like, they have to
Big,
wear pants, but they're clearly not very happy about it because look at that thing.
big and full of semen that needs to be milked out
Right.
of them.
Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, like you said, I think there's a lot of good variety. If you're an oral fan, there's plenty of tongue work.
Hmm.
There's also some real big dick action in here. So, yeah, felt like it had maybe something for everyone. Maybe not everybody, but there was certainly lots to latch on
Plenty
to,
to
I
go
felt.
around. Yeah, I mean, it's a 15 alone just for like anticipation of what his dick will look like. Like, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that gets its own score. Is just like, the mystery.
The mystery indeed. Yeah, big reveal, and kind of gives you that giddy like first time vibes of like I don't know what to expect here, like, but I'm here for it.
And you know what? I will say, I think CM Nascosta delivered, because I never would have envisioned what was actually. I can't even say in his pants because he doesn't wear pants. But I
Right.
never would have envisioned what he's got packing down there.
I'm not even sure I am still
I
correctly
still
envisioning
don't
it,
see
but
it.
some kind of tapered S-shaped, girthy, protruding from a slit into another slit.
But
Like,
where does
all
it
right,
go? Nobody
yeah,
knows. So the mystery is still alive.
yes, yeah. So high heat rating for me, definitely.
Nice. Good. Awesome. Well, I love it. We are on the upward trajectory with your romance reads. And so that just means the bar has been set even higher for Cocktober 2023.
Well, I can't wait to see what you come up with next.
You and me both. So until then, I mean, obviously, I'd love for you to read romance between now and then. However, if you decide you want to reserve your romance reading specifically for boobies and newbies, I'm not going to complain either.
I may have to check out Morning Glory Milking Farm. That I think there's some backstory there I would benefit from learning. So But maybe I can do some investigation of myself. Maybe I'll find something to share with you for 2023.
Yes, I like it. All right, good stuff.
I'll see if I can rustle up any like D&D specific things. Maybe there's something out there that hasn't been tapped yet.
Yeah, you let me know if you find it and I will read it.
Perfect.
Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast. Hey, Boobies and Newbies fans, I've got some exciting news for the month of October. First things first, the wonderful ladies from My Worst Date podcast have invited me to open their live show at the end of the month. That's right, I'm heading back to LA for a one-night only event, Friday, October 28th, and I've invited my girl Becky from Too Stupid to Live to join me. We will be discussing the best and worst of romance archetypes, playing a game or two, and sharing romance book recs based off of our favorite bad dating stories from My Worst Date. Tickets are available now, and the best news, there are both in-person and stream-from-home options available. That's right, friends near and wide can watch and listen. So grab your tickets now using the link in any of my social media bios or by visiting boobiesandnewbies.com. And as if that wasn't exciting enough, October is also the release month for my debut holiday novella, Meet Me in Los Feliz. Now, if you like bisexual heroes who paint their nails, plus-size heroines with purple hair, sexy shenanigans involving toys and pajama onesies, and Christmas in a big city where, for once, it does not snow, then I highly recommend pre-ordering a copy. Meet Me in Los Feliz is available October 25th in both paperback and ebook, and if you do attend the live show in person, I'll be selling and signing copies. I'll also be offering signed copies and swag packs for a limited time only, so look out for that announcement soon. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast, and I hope that support will continue as I start to write and publish my own romance novels.